and greetings from the newly launched postgraduate hub at Edinburgh's Law School. One of the committees that I'm involved with helped get this space up and running because previously postgraduate taught students actually didn't have like their own space, so this is quite lovely. Anyway, Ramblings with Rebecca. We are back to human rights law. I know, you thought you were done. Oh no, there's always more to ramble about. Today on Ramblings with Rebecca, we're going to talk about absolute and non-absolute rights, or fundamental qualified rights, and those kind of things. All human rights are human rights. They are rights. They are rights simply by virtue of being a human. All humans have these rights, regardless of their blah, 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 blah. However, there are debates around kind of hierarchies of rights. If two rights are in direct conflict with each other, which right trumps? If enacting one person's right harms another person's right, which person or which right trumps? Those kind of things. To help with this debate, there is a division between absolute and non-absolute. These non-absolute also qualified restricted rights. And certain rights are absolute. They absolutely cannot be infringed, taken away, violated under any circumstances whatsoever, period, end of story. Nothing, nada, zilp, zilch. Article 3, the prohibition of torture, is the most widely cited example of this absolute right. There is never an allowance for states to torture people. Never, ever, 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 legally. This was severely tested in a case from Germany when some police officers engaged with a child kidnapper and murderer in some questionable ways because they thought the child was still alive and thought that if they got information about where the kid was on time, they could save the life. So there was this big frenzy in Europe around whether or not torture was acceptable in cases of save a life. And of course, we have all of these, horrific what-if scenarios of, what if by torturing this one individual we'll get the code to turn off the nuclear bomb that's about to annihilate the Earth. Things like this. Yes, I say it somewhat sarcastically, but of course these are very serious issues and questions. Counter-arguments, go along. Information obtained under torture quite frequently isn't legit, that kind of thing. But putting aside all of those, however you want to argue and debate, legally, as it stands, prohibition of torture is an absolute right, and there's never a circumstance under which states are authorized under international law, and therefore their own laws, so long as they're signed on, to torture. Qualified rights, non-absolute, restricted rights, these kind of things, are rights that are important and are human rights, but states can lawfully interfere, limit, violate in certain ways under certain circumstances. Most frequently, this is under a state of emergency or war. There are some rights which are derogable, so states can, in times of emergency or war, say these particular rights we're not focusing on right now. These aren't an issue. Again, absolute rights are non-derogable. You can never say that these rights aren't being enacted. I'm sorry, I'm really losing my vocabulary today. But qualified rights. States can lawfully interfere in certain circumstances in pursuit of a legitimate aim or to uphold other democratic principles, other rights. Freedom of expression is a really good example here. Hate crimes, right? Not illegal in most places. So one person's right to the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, these kind of things, does not go so far as to allow that person to violate another human being's fundamental absolute rights. Any rights that are qualified has to be prescribed by law and or necessary and proportionate. So the state has to give guidance as to how it is going to be restricted and what that's going to mean. And there is a report mechanism in the United Nations for international human rights law about when states, have to say, hey, P.S. we're currently not doing this set of rights. Here's where our lack of our infringement is going up to, that kind of thing. So these qualified rights shouldn't be seen as less important necessarily, but just rights that are a little bit more regulated and in control and don't go all the way So there you go. Absolute and qualified rights.